Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by Remi Warren to discuss logistics and tactics for planning a backcountry mountain whitetail hunt. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light. And today, we're continuing our adventure series, taking a look at different ways to bring adventure into your whitetail hunting season. And we've got a heck of an idea here today and a heck of a guest. As I just mentioned, joining me is Remi Warren. He's a guy that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. He's a longtime mountain hunting guide, expert, television host, podcaster, social media extraordinaire, one of the absolute best resources when it comes to planning Western or big, wild adventures hunting trips. But what a lot of folks probably don't realize is that he is also kind of a closet whitetail guru. The guy really enjoys going on whitetail hunts every single year, but doing it in a pretty unique way, definitely different than your standard whitetail hunt. He is doing this in the backcountry and in the mountains. He's doing backpacking trips for whitetails. He's trekking in deep into the wilderness for whitetails. He's chasing them in very different kinds of terrain, big mountains, rough country, and he's killing great deer, having a lot of fun, having a great experience, and coming back with very unique stories to tell. So if that sounds appealing to you, if you are intrigued with the idea of backpacking for whitetails or going into the backcountry or up into the mountains for a whitetail hunt, even if you're just going to do day trips and camping down by the road, this is the podcast for you. Remi Warren is going to share his secrets, his tactics, his plans for pulling off this kind of hunt. We talk through everything from how to determine a region that should have whitetails out west, where to find these deer on the mountains in a big wild forested landscape. We talk through planning logistics around your camping. Should you backpack in? Should you car camp? What kind of gear do you need for this kind of hunt? What kind of conditions should you be prepared for? We discuss a lot around tactics, the different specific styles of hunting he uses, the places he searches out deer, how long he stays in a given region before moving to the next spot, how he uses calls and rattles, what time of year is best for a backcountry whitetail hunt in the mountains, all sorts of stuff like that. If you want to try something new this year, this is going to be a podcast you definitely want to listen to. Remi's a heck of a resource, an expert in so many ways, and someone who I think has a lot to teach each and every one of us. So without any further ado, I think we should just get to my chat with Mr. Remi Warren. All right, with me now is Remi Warren. Welcome to the show, Remi.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it. And you are someone who I've wanted to have on the show for a while now. It's kind of crazy. This thing's been around for 12 years or something. And this is our first podcast, but it's perfect timing because we're doing this series of whitetail adventure ideas. And I have seen your whitetail hunts on YouTube for quite a few years now, but they are very different than just about any other whitetail hunt out there. I've heard you describe it as big mountain whitetail hunting. What do you mean when you say that? Maybe paint a picture for us of what that looks like and what's the appeal?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way that I kind of like to hunt whitetails is essentially mountain hunting whitetails. And I think that, whitetails kind of get lumped into the category of river bottom bucks. And it's like, and out west, like, no disrespect to whitetail hunters, but like they get a bad rap, right? Like mule deer is king. But, one of the things for me is like mule deer hunting is tough. And it's like also getting tags can be difficult. And I love chasing whitetails. But I kind of like to do it on my terms. Like I like to hunt them where nobody else is hunting them. Or, where you kind of have a little bit of like a different style hunt. Like, I just know my strengths and weaknesses. I'm not great at sitting for a long time. Like, I think that like there's places I could go and be successful, but like, it's just not my preferred method or style. And so I kind of like key in on whitetail deer that are in this like mountainous habitat. I call it big mountain whitetails. Like oftentimes I'll be hunting late season. I'm like, I target them. I'll target them during archery as well, but primarily during the rut. And like, I might be hunting in an area where the mountains go, let's say like the valley floors 3,000 feet, the tops are like 8,000 feet, and I'm hunting them around 6,500 feet. So like, it's a pretty good climb, and like they're in places and pockets that, you know, most people might not think about. They're definitely, you know, a kind of different habits and habitat of like, they live in the big timber, they live in these big mountains, they're surviving and breeding and like doing their thing in these like backcountry areas. And in even like, you mentioned some of the videos on them. This is like a hunt that I do every year in multiple different states or different places. And it's kind of like one of my personal hunts every year. Like I film very few of them, which is, I think is partially because like I do hunt a lot of them like in wilderness areas too. So I don't share those hunts at all. Unless I can find like some good spots that are outside of wilderness. And then I kind of actually just do it as like a side thought, like, oh, maybe I'll go like, bring my phone and do some filming. You know, and like I've had my butt kicked sometimes, and I've come out on top sometimes. Like it's just, I don't know. I love it. Like there's a certain challenge about it, but like it's just a fun hunt. It's a lot of fun.
I heard you say once that when you get up in a tree, all you want to do is climb back out of it.
Yeah.
But for so many whitetail hunters, it's the opposite, right? The average whitetail guy just loves being up there, loves sitting in that kind of prototypical whitetail hotspot and seeing everything come alive around him. To that guy or girl who's grown up doing that, what would be the pitch if you had to give them like the elevator pitch? You've got 30 seconds with them to convince them to leave Iowa or leave Illinois or leave Ohio and try a mountain hunt once. What's that quick pitch?
That's a good one. I mean, to be honest, like you just don't know what's going to happen. And it's like a big adventure. I feel like the adventure aspect of it is like kind of the rush of it. And if you like getting up in a tree like 20 feet, well, you can get 3,000 feet up in the mountain. So it's like big views, you know, like, I think the other pitch is like one of the things that I, you know, like having guided a lot of hunters and I, you know, used to do a lot of like this big country whitetail guiding too in a different area. And the thing was like a lot of these guys that would come on these hunts would like hunt 20 acres, 10 acres, 5 acres, 100 acre, whatever, you know what I mean? And I'm like, dude, we don't even like blink at that. You're hunting 500,000 acres. Like you just can go anywhere. And it's like a very freeing experience to be like, I'm whitetail hunting and I can go wherever I want. Like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I can see the appeal to that for sure. What's if the best thing is the adventure, freedom to roam, great views, lots of unexpected surprises, what's maybe the flip side? What would you say might be the downside or the worst side of this kind of thing?
It kicks your butt, like mentally and physically. The way that I do it, like, you know, you aren't going to, if you're used to sitting in a tree stand and seeing, you know, hundreds of deer or whatever, it's not going to happen. Like there's days where you will see no deer. There's days where you see does and you're like, I'm in the zone. And then there's days where you see a buck or whatever. And then there's days where you shoot like 150, 160 inch buck. So like, it's all over the place, right? Like there's times where you don't even like come close to that age class. And then there's times where you like just turn up giants. Like it can happen. And it's cool.
What kind of expectation then would you say is fair to have? Like, is it, and I know you've hunted a bunch of different areas out west for whitetails and it varies from place to place, but you know, coming into a hunt like this for someone new, should they expect like a safe assumption is like lower deer densities and that should be like how they go into it? Or what do you think they should be viewing as success?
Yeah, I think like you expect lower deer densities. Finding like a mature type buck is like a pretty good feat in a lot of these areas. You have to realize too, like the densities are low. The tags are generally like over the counter kind of thing. And, like the country's big. So like I've been on, like, I'm trying to think, just past hunts, and there's somewhere it was like, I maybe hunted 7 days, saw 4 bucks and ended up shooting a buck. And it was like, and you're like, you're pumped. And it's probably like a 120, 125 type buck. You're like, that's a heck of a deer for that kind of hunt. Right. Sometimes the challenge is just like finding buck. And then other times too, like you see quite a few bucks, like you kind of get in them and you've got your zone. But I think like the challenge is just like kind of finding deer in some ways, like within that kind of terrain.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, is I feel like so many times when you go from traditional whitetail country to a big mountain landscape out west, the landscape is so different, the scale is so different. Yeah. It's one thing to go out there and be like, okay, this is the kind of country that elk live in, and there's so much talk about the kind of things that elk gravitate towards, or the kinds of habitat that mule deer gravitate towards, but there's not a lot of discussion around where whitetails fit into that mix, just because, like you said, they're kind of looked down on out there. Not as many people care about them. So how do you go about just narrowing in, drilling in on what would be a productive region? How do you get to a spot where it's like, oh yeah, this is whitetail country versus elk versus mule deer versus anything else?
Yeah, that's a good question. So like, there's a couple of like habitat things that I key in on, and I do like it. The one thing I could say is like, it takes time. And that's the hard part, is like, I'll go into, I've hunted a lot of new areas doing this, and it's like, it takes time to kind of be like, well, where's the concentration of deer? I've utilized a lot of scouting in the past, like off season. And I try to time the hunt like for a certain kind of tactic, I guess. Like it's the tactic. My tactic is, well, a couple things, right? Like I could go into an area and I could go hunt that like traditional whitetail country, and there's probably whitetails there. So if you have that kind of habit, if you're in an area where there are whitetails and it's like that traditional whitetail type country, there's bucks and there's deer, maybe it's private, whatever. Then the surrounding areas, there's probably like a population of whitetails that do not exist in that. They exist in that mountain terrain. A couple of the features that like, whitetailers, like they like that thicker stuff. Those like in earlier season, those like north bases, like a lot of cover, a lot of brush, a lot of other stuff. And let's say you've got one deer in 5 square miles, right? Dude, that's not the conducive way to hunt that country. Yeah. So what I do is I then find like that habitat. I do look for like these, I kind of like focus on that top third of the mountain, and then these like bench features that roll into south facing areas. And then within those zones, I look for areas with some kind of visibility clearing, a burn, clear cut, open grass like meadow, something similar you'd look for like elk feeding areas. And I'm not necessarily utilizing that for like that being good habitat, but I'm utilizing it for the time of year that I'm hunting. I'm like honing in on their behavior of deer that are cruising. And then they're inevitably going to cross those openings, and that allows me like that advantage. So it's deer that you can never find any other time of year. They're looking for does. And so I try to target pockets of does, areas where there's visibility, and then and then timing of the rut to catch deer that'll be moving, because you have a higher likelihood of like actually spotting them.
Is there any kind of separation between where you're going to find mule deer versus where you're going to find whitetail deer? Because I know there's obviously some overlap, but when someone is looking and they're thinking, well, maybe I'm going to hunt Montana, maybe Colorado, maybe Idaho, maybe Wyoming, maybe wherever, and they're looking at all this country and they're trying to think, all right, I can get a whitetail tag. How do I discern between where these two species might be? Is it going to be one and the same, and I'm just going to have to go out there and make sure I'm paying attention to what kind of deer is cruising across that opening. I'm just wondering, as they're trying to like narrow this down a little bit more, is there any way to discern between the two?
There is, like, some of it you can't discern necessarily like on a map all the time.
Yeah.
But like the mule deer habitat's often more open, and the whitetail habitat that I'm hunting is very closed in, like really thick. It's got more like, not that you won't find mule deer in that country, but like the places that I often go where I'm like consistently successful getting whitetails, like I mean, maybe I've seen a mule deer or two. But it's like the whitetails run the show there. And you will find places like that. How to discern that can be a little difficult. And some of these places, like, dude, I have a state that I hunt in, and I originally went there to hunt mule deer and like got into a pocket of whitetails. I was like, shit, I don't think anybody's hunting whitetails here. And then like have killed some of my best bucks in there. Because it's just like, for some reason it's, whitetail habitat. Like there's good bottoms. Like you think of like traditional whitetail habitat that you'd find anywhere, like those draws, those like creek bottoms, like willows, like alder, like thicker type terrain, like good browse. Whereas like mule deer want more open, rocky, like see and run kind of terrains, where it's like you've got your whitetail habitat of like good browse for whitetails, and like mule deer are more in that sage, mahogany kind of like open stuff. And then also like the mule deer will gravitate toward those larger open areas, whereas like the whitetails are more in that like thick fringe. So I look for like pretty well timbered areas, to be honest. Like, and I wouldn't necessarily go target that for mule deer.
Yeah. You mentioned that your tactics typically apply to that cruising phase. I think from a lot of folks I've talked to in the past, the whitetail rut might be a little bit different out there by you guys than it is back here in the East. What's your window out there when you see that best rutting activity for whitetails? What like date range?
I like the first part of November.
Okay.
If I had like my druthers, but I end up hunting like a lot later just because of like schedule wise. Like I normally hunt like around Thanksgiving, and you'll still catch them, but you have to know where like the pockets, like where does live, because they start to like get locked in. Once they've locked down with a doe, you're done. Like that's it. I like the cruising phase though, because I utilize calling a lot. Like, and maybe that's not something that everybody does everywhere, but like I rattle and I call. And so like that cruising phase, like bucks are really honed into that, and you can kind of catch those like big bucks moving, because there's, like I said, you're in an area that maybe you're hunting a canyon that's like 10 miles long, and there's, I don't know, 10, 15 does in there, whatever. And there's maybe a couple buck, whatever. I don't know. Maybe 20 does. I don't know. And there's maybe 2 or 3 bucks that are like in and out of that. And they're just doing hot laps, like, looking for does. And so like that visual cue, I know work, but that sound can travel. And I do like a lot of rattling, a lot of calling, a lot of grunting, like doe bleeding. And I don't like, no such thing as overcalling it for me. Like I hammer on those things. Like my strategy is get to places where I can glass, and I'm always calling, like rattling, calling, stopping, moving. I kind of treat it like almost like I elk hunt, like in a weird way. Like, and like people that have never done that, they're like, calling doesn't work. I'm like, it works here, because these bucks might not find a deer this year, and if they can hear one, they will come in hot. And it's fun.
Wow.
Like it's a lot of fun. Like that's my favorite part about it.
You say like you're calling all the time. Like, give me like how many times an hour are you calling?
Constantly. Like if I'm sitting and glassing, like, dude, I hit the rattle, and then I do like grunt, and then like doe bleats, estrus calls.
Yep.
And then I'll sit for like few minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, glass, hit the calls again, whether it's a rattle or grunt or whatever. Because like they're probably moving, and the deer that like I've sat in areas where, I'll pick a spot. I'm like, okay, this has got like a little bit of an open, and it's an area where I know, like I know I've seen does. I know does live here. if I had more patience, but I just like don't have the patience. So I'm like, okay, let's pull them out. And sometimes it's just enough to get them to step out to where you can see them. It's not necessarily like trying to get them to come in. The younger deer come in, but then again, like we've killed bucks that, are just like big old bucks ready to fight. So I'll do that. Like I'll do a call sequence. Maybe I'm going to glass this area for 30 minutes, an hour. I don't know. Maybe longer. And I'll sit there set up ready. Like I've had deer walk into 5 yards, and then I'll do that. Like I bought a climber stand because there's a couple places that I'm like, dude, it would probably be convenient to like do that while I'm there, but I haven't utilized it yet. So I'll do that, and then I'll like continue hiking, get to the next vantage, call. And sometimes like it's just to like get those deer to do a different route. There's a lot of little tricks to this, like finding these bucks and getting these bucks to do what you want, that you don't employ other places. Like, one of the strategies that I use is like, if I know, let's say there's a bunch of deer tracks on this one hill and there's like one opening, I always get like across from it. Sometimes what I'll do is like, I'll go over there if there's like a lot of snow, and I'll walk the edge of the cover. And then in the middle, I walk across, and then I walk back down to myself, and I'll sit there and I'll watch that, because those deer will stay in the cover, and then they hit your trail, and then they'll follow that trail, and they'll come out in the open, and then we'll shoot them. Like there's a lot of crazy strategy that people don't utilize other places, because it's just like the path of least resistance, like in the snow. And that's like one of the strategies that I use, like little tricks like that you probably don't use on whitetails anywhere else.
Yeah.
A lot of calling, a lot of like weird stuff like that.
What about wind when you're setting up in these kind of glass / calling ambush locations? Are you thinking about wind in that, setup? How's that?
Yeah. I'm definitely like, the wind's big, but I think most of the time, like I'm a cross canyon glassing. If I'm rifle hunting, archery hunting, like it's like a whole nother beast. Right. And I do that. And we do that in September. And we're targeting like summer range bachelor bucks in a way, like alpine bucks, which is a whole completely different game. But like late season, mostly rifle hunting, or like bow hunting, but like, utilizing the calling to bring them in. And yeah, it's mostly getting across canyon. And then like generally your wind, like you're working into the wind as you're still hunting too, like working into the wind. The whole game is built on working into the wind. And then if, the nice thing about having all that room is like, if the wind's not great, you can move. And so like continually, like where I think the deer might be, just making sure that wind's right. But I kind of just start that hiking, walking into the wind. And then, another strategy that like it utilize a lot, that's very successful in this kind of country, is like fresh snow and tracking deer. And I utilize that a lot, like, and sometimes you end up a long ways away, but that's how I actually kind of find good areas, is like covering a lot of country in fresh snows. I mean, like, dude, track, like it's a dead giveaway of like, this is a concentration of deer here.
So imagining that situation, kind of going a little further, if you're new to an area, I guess, and you don't know this spot yet, there's snow on the ground. Is that maybe the starting point, other than, I'm sure, e-scouting, picking out likely areas, but then just cover a lot of ground, find tracks? Are you walking, is it just walk ridge lines, or are you walking draws, or, how do you cover ground the best when it comes to whitetails?
Mostly, like walking ridge lines. Because like walking in the bottom, you'll see deer, but it's loud. It's like hard to walk in often. But yeah, I'm looking for that sign. Sometimes I will walk the bottoms because I know that they cruise in there and make moves. So I'll walk those bottoms. I mean, and it might be like a weird tactic as well. Like there's a lot of stuff that probably doesn't line up with any other whitetail hunting. But like if there's an area that I'm like, this is a thick area that like looks like good whitetail habitat, like, you'll get into this like spot, and it's like there's this little bench and there's like water in it. There's like tall grass. There's I don't know, like different kind of, like you'll be in pines and it's got like willows or something else, something like that. You're like, oh, this looks like a good spot. And you start to see sign or whatever, or maybe you don't even see sign. Like I'll walk through that area and knowing like, yeah, I'm still hunting, but if I blow a deer out, it's actually not a bad thing. Because I kind of will learn something about that area and those deer, like, okay, there's deer in here. I bumped them. A lot of these deer have never seen people. So it's like, cool. Like they're just like, they run off and stop. And I have the call handy too. So like if I bump a deer, I just hit that call immediately. Um, and then knowing like, okay, now I know that this is like a hole. This is an area where deer are living. I can then kind of extrapolate other strategies of like getting up on the ridge, glassing into here. But like step one, find the deer. And that could take sometimes days, sometimes immediately. Like, where are these deer pockets at? And then step two is like strategizing and like actually employing tactics to like be able to kill the deer.
Yeah.
So like bumping deer is not bad. It's just because you got to find them. Like, and if you're worried about blowing something out all the time, you're never going to find them, to be honest.
Yeah. You said that some of these deer maybe have never seen people.
Yeah.
That kind of ties into one of the things I've been curious about, which is I know that whitetails don't get nearly the attention out there by you as they do back here by me. Not as much pressure for whitetails, but there are a lot of guys out there chasing elk, chasing mule deer, etc.
Yeah.
Do whitetails simply exist in places where everybody else is ignoring? And so you just don't have mule deer and elk hunters spending any time there. So does that lead to these deer just not being pressured? Or are there elk hunters and mule deer hunters all around too, and everything's getting pressured?
It depends where you are, but a lot of the places it's like real bad elk habitat, because it's so thick and it'd be like, it's hard to hunt. It's not like conducive for killing elk. There's not really any mule deer, and so there's not really a reason that people go to some of those places. And like a lot of people that might not even like realize that there's whitetails there or really be like keen on diving in and hunting them, I guess. So that's one of the reasons that like I'll target those areas where I find that there's going to be fewer people. And I also try to find those seasons. Like the cool thing about a lot of whitetail hunts, and this is probably across the country, but like there's kind of more liberal seasons when it comes to whitetail hunting. So like the elk season might be a week, like the mule deer season might be a week. The whitetail season could be like a month. And so you can get into the mountains like when there's no one else hunting another animal. And oftentimes, because there are a lot of like statewide general tags and stuff like that, I'll target areas where whitetail season's open, nothing else is. And you really limit like the amount of people in those particular areas. So it's like not a great area for that stuff anyways. There's whitetails and there's no one else out there. And that makes a big difference.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've done a little bit of elk hunting. One of the big things I learned out there hunting elk in the mountains was that there was this kind of predictable pattern with elk going kind of up and down elevation based on time of day, what's going on. Do whitetails do that out there? Do you see an up and down movement, or do they kind of have an elevation they stick at, and that, like you said, they've got a hole and they stay in that hole, quote unquote? What have you seen from that kind of standpoint?
Yeah, so like the does don't often move much and the bucks move an incredible amount. I've seen like over the years, like I've actually, which is surprising because like it's hard to figure out their pattern in a way. And I've randomly found the same deer in like certain areas. So they'll be up on the top over here. Like let's say it's I don't know, like a valley. Say there's a valley with a creek in the bottom. And then there's a bunch of like a big area. Think of like, I don't know, 15 miles across or something like that. And then there's like multiple drainages. And then you've got like, different habitat types. And you've got like a pocket of does up in here near this clear cut, and then pocket of doe, wherever. And the bucks will be like up in that high kind of mid elevation, and they'll cruise. They'll drop down, they'll cross valley, and then they'll kind of like, they move kind of fairly quickly up into that other elevation, and then they kind of cruise that, trying to hit every single pocket is like looking for does. And I do think that they kind of make like in the wind circuits that are real big. Like I've seen and this is just like random coincidence, I think, because I had a buddy hunting and I found like a weird, it was like a deformed buck. It was like one horn and then the other horn was like really, like there's no way that there's two deer that look like this. And I saw it in one particular spot, and later that day he saw it in another spot. And we kind of always assumed that like these deer kind of make these just based off like tracks and stuff, where these bucks would be going. And then, it ended up being like a long ways away and seeing that same buck. And like the other thing is like where the does will be is 100, like so consistent. Like once you find those doe pockets, they are very tight. Like they don't move a lot. They'll move down the mountain and up the mountain, but within like the same drainage. But the bucks will go like freaking miles. Like it would be cool to collar one of these kind of deer and just see the like hot laps that we call them that they do. But then they can be pretty consistent. Like I've killed a deer a year after I saw it within like the same 2 days a year later. Wow. Checking the same doe pockets. So like they have huge, like the bucks have huge patterns and the does have like micro patterns. And then as the rut, like as weather changes, where those does congregate within their zone changes. But I think like they couldn't survive any other way. Like I just think that they would vanish off that landscape because I think that they just get too spread out. So the way that they survive is like the does hold and the bucks move. And that allows like the bucks to cover all that country and find the few does, but kind of knowing those pockets is key. And that's like you can, if you've got like a couple good live baits, as I like to call them, like you're going to find bucks eventually.
Well, what's kind of cool about what you're saying is it's actually exactly the same as hunting here, except like the scale is just increased 10x, like
right
here you might have deer that live in a square mile, but what all the research has shown during the rut is that, there's these doe hot spots, and people like to say that you can't pattern a buck during the rut, but actually collared studies out here have found that, they have a handful of hot spots that they return to, they cycle back to over and over again during the rut, looking for those does. And it's just happening in a much tighter area because these deer don't need to travel very far because there's food, cover, security, and does, every 100 acres here. While with you, same thing. You're just stretching it out to 10 square miles, maybe, or a 10-mile long canyon. So it's interesting how deer, in certain ways, deer are deer. Yeah. Just the habitat is a little bit different. And I imagine there's, I'm imagining there's pinch points and funnels out there by you, just like here, 100%. That just look different, right? I'm sure like saddles and stuff are probably the name of the game for you on that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Like saddles are big. Like those like benches and then the benches above like multiple draws, places where the wind kind of comes up from like the doe pockets. Like I've got a couple places that it's thick and it's like I find a lot of like my intel based off of like when it snows, and then you just have to remember like these places that you find because you can kind of like learn a lot from following these deer. Which is a cool thing about this kind of thing is you can follow deer and see what they do. I mean, there's been, 2 years ago, I found, I was hunting here. It was like snowing all night, stopped right at sun up, cut a fresh track, followed it. I think I hiked like 7 or 8 miles, but I knew like where a doe pocket was and that buck was going right to it. And so like through past, like being like, okay, I bet you he's bedded up here. And sure enough, like, I was with a buddy and he's like, dude, we've been hiking for 7 miles on it. I was like, I know he's going to be on this bench. Like, this is where they bed because I've done this like same route, like the same path, the same thing like years before. And like, it's cool to see where it's like, okay, how they move. It's like they run the ridges. They, then like those shorter bowls and stuff, they kind of cross through that, but it's like, okay, it's because the wind, falls that way or whatever. And then they get into these pockets where it's like, okay, this ridge, this little bump is a little thicker and he's going to be bedded up here. And, it's like just a larger scale, but they have very specific habits that are, I'm sure, like universal to whitetails. It's just like a different elevation gain doing it,
So you said that you like to find a vantage, call, move to another vantage, call.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you said like 30 minutes to an hour, but I just want to make sure, like, what's your typical amount of time you'll give a spot? And like, how much time will you give a drainage maybe? Like, it sounds like maybe you'll move a couple times within a drainage, but how often will you
Yeah.
move to a totally new area and try something brand new?
Oh, a lot. So it's like as I get more information about an area, that depends on how long I'm going to stay or commit to it. Like there's some places where I go, okay, like I know the time of year, like I've hunted this certain spot before. I know like this is eventually a big buck's going to come through here and I might sit there all day. And then there's places where it's like I don't know the area. I'm trying to find that pocket, that right pocket, and I might move constantly. Um, when I get into a place where I'm like, oh, this is Bucky, or like when you get to those, like, oh, this is a corridor, like this has everything I need. Like it's got good habitat on both sides. Here's a good pinch point. Like I might sit there for a lot longer, um, until I kind of feel like I've covered the area. And for me, mostly it's like, to be honest, sometimes it's like, I'm cold and bored now. I'm going to walk. And it's not a great strategy, but it is. Yeah. It's like you just don't know. Like some days I'm like, going to sit. And I've got buddies that, like they'll bring those like heater bodysuit things and they'll go, like, they've got the patience to be like, okay, we found a good spot. I'm going to sit it. I'm like, good on you, dude. And they kill good bucks that way. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go bust through here and try to do the same thing. But, like I'm successful doing it. Like, so I think both people, but, it just depends too. Like if I'm in an area and I'm like calling and I'm getting like good response or seeing does, like if I see deer, if I'm in an area that I know has does, it's the right time of year. I'm like, okay, it's really thick. And I'm like, okay, I'm seeing does every once in a while, man. I might sit there until I feel like a buck that's cruising would, have popped out, and then I'll move. If I'm not seeing anything, if I don't have sign, if I'm like, I'll just keep moving until I find the deer though. Cause like you really need to focus on where deer are. Otherwise you're just going to spend all your time wasted where there's no deer.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Like, yeah.
Now, what about the scenario where you're sitting there and you keep seeing does, but a whole day goes by, you don't see a buck. You get back out there the next day, seeing a bunch of does, still don't see a buck. Will you stick to a place that has does, even if you're not seeing a shooter buck yet, just because eventually one will cruise through? Or do you have to see antlers to stick around?
I think I have to see the right kind of does. So one of the things that like I disregard pretty much all does with fawns. They doesn't, from what I've found, like you'll find like those nursery pockets where it's like a bunch of does with fawns in that like cruising phase, and it doesn't hold the bucks. But then you find those like fawnless does, and they tend to stick around those areas more. Maybe it's like they're going to come into estrus sooner. I'm not sure, but like it depends on the stage of the rut too. Later in the season, then I will focus on those like pockets with more does and fawns. But if I'm in an area where I think like they're cruising, it's early in the season, and like I see does but no bucks, I would probably continue to utilize that time to like find more pockets. And then I check pocket to pocket to pocket. So like as those bucks are making circuits, I'm kind of making circuits as well. Because like what I will find as well is like once I hit where bucks are, you're gonna find other bucks. Because what will happen is like whether there's snow or not, it doesn't matter. Like those bucks smell those bucks, and then they like get on those trails, and then they follow those same routes. So like once you've got the zone, then I focus in. Like if I got an area where it's like, oh, there's some does and I've seen bucks, there's going to be more bucks. If I just find a pocket with does and like no bucks, then sometimes until later on, there might not be any.
Okay, we're in this scenario. We're seeing does. We've seen some bucks come through. You're shifting around, doing the calling. What about like the specific sequences of calling? You said you're grunting a lot, you're rattling a lot, but what does that actually look like? Like what kind of grunting do you do? How long of a sequence? Same thing for rattling. I'm curious about the details there.
Yeah, man. I'm trying to think. Like, so often I probably start out with like grunt, 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 and then rattle. And then or like sometimes I'll start off with like a doe bleat, like something where if there's something close by, it might just draw them out before I go crash antlers.
Yeah.
Because like sometimes like when I rattle too, I'm not really rattling for the small bucks, but they still often are the most like interested in it no matter what you do. But yeah, so it would be like, I don't know, maybe I'll like grunt 10 times, 15 times. And then I probably do it a few times, and then I always throw in like a it's hard to do with the voice, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's
like,
not bad.
yeah, like, okay. And then I'll probably do a couple of those and wait. And then it's like I use these I've used everything. But there's like a pack rack or something, like it's like a two little things. I found like all the plastic crap though, when it gets cold, like a lot of times it's real cold, and that's probably why I don't sit too long. But like they break when it gets cold. But I'll use that. Like it seems like it carries good noise, something that you like. I try to also find like I do the same thing that I do with elk hunting with bugling, where your sound travels. So if I got an area where I can hear it echoing across the canyon, I know that like I'm covering the area more. Yeah. If it's like soaked up by vegetation, then I know that I have to sit longer. So depending on those areas, when I can hear it like broadcasting across there, I know that it's traveling and I know that it's going to be more receptive. And I kind of feel like if anything's within earshot, I often see them within that like 15-minute range. Like it does depend on the timing of the rut and how like deer receptive they've been. But so I'll do that, like grunt, bleat, rattle, grunt.
How long are you rattling for?
Like bucks fighting for a while, like, I don't know, like it's hard to 5 minutes, 4 minutes. Yeah.
4 minutes?
Okay. Yeah. It just depends. Like, it'd be like, I'll hit it like back and forth, like I try to kind of think of like two deer fighting, like how long are they doing this for? Wait, do it again. Because the strategy isn't like necessarily to be like a realistic deer. It's to just catch the attention of something that's like looking for any deer. And so I'll do that. Then I'll go back to grunting, probably like 3 minutes later. I'll do another set of calling, wait again, 3 to 5 minutes. And then as I kind of like get closer to maybe potentially leaving, like it depends on like how that sound's traveling too. Like if the rattling is traveling real well, I'll do a lot more rattling. And the other thing that I've noticed too, for like, I mean, on these hunts, I'm actually like targeting pretty mature deer. And so I do like, if I bring antlers, they're often like heavy. I actually use like MeatEater antlers a lot. That big initial smack, like I do that loud, like crash smack. Like I want it to be loud and I want it to be fairly aggressive. I don't kind of like mediocre do it. Like I get after it. Because that's the one, like if you want the big bucks to run in, it needs to sound pretty heavy. Yeah. And like, so I guess I'd say like, I don't know, time wise, like grunting for a minute, rattling, and then sometimes I'll set a timer so I don't 3 to 5 minutes and then hit it again. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
So you said you're, trying to target mature bucks.
Yeah.
One of the things you hear about so much when hunting out west, especially if you're trying to get a, mature mule deer, elk, or really any elk, is you got to get way off the road, get to these hard to reach places, right? Does that apply to whitetails out there? Or are you trekking in really deep to find these deer spots, or are you doing this close to a car camp? What's that look like?
Oh, it just depends, to be honest. Like, the thing is, like, they do move a lot, and also like that density of timber and the low density of deer, you could kill these deer anywhere. Like there's places that I've hunted and you're literally like walking, like moving spots, vehicle, getting out, doing some calling, doing some glassing, whatever, moving. And there's other places where it's like, I'll be in a wilderness situation and like, shit, you can backpack on it, like covering country and keep everything on your back and like following, especially if there's like snow, you might, like, I might be 10 miles away from here tonight. I'm just going to camp where I'm at and find these areas. So it just depends. Like sometimes, honestly, like I make my hunt plan based on the weather too, because like it'll be 20 below, and you're just like it's nice to go back to your camp. And then so like when I'm not packing in, you probably do more hiking than when you're packing in, to be honest. Like you might hike in 5 miles, like, and then hike back out 5 miles or something like that. Or more. Like my wife's first whitetail buck. We didn't camp because it was like terribly cold, but like we climbed, I think it was like we did, I don't know, 40, almost 5,000 feet of elevation gain that day to kill her buck. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's gnarly. Like in
That's a unique whitetail
snow
experience.
and like, yeah, dude, we spotted the buck like probably 3 miles away. And, well, we spotted a deer walking across the top of this opening and then went up there. It was a doe. And I'm like, I know this zone. Let's get in there. Got in there. We're like laying down and watching that trail where that doe was. And sure enough, a buck comes out of the timber and like kind of that same thing where I was saying, like they follow those trails pretty good. So if you see where one's crossed, like it's a good indication that somebody's, it's like snowing and we just had climbed like just that last climb was 3,000 feet, not including to like get into there.
Jeez.
And it was like, it was awesome. Like it was a tiny little, it was our first year. I think it was our first. Yeah, it was our first whitetail. And so like, I don't know where I'm going with that, but like, it can be as far and deep as you want, or it could be something where it's just like, easy to access to. Like it doesn't have to be way back there. But I mean, like my theory is this, like I like to like I don't know the best way to say it. Like I kind of hunt for the area in some ways, but also like I really like if I've got the time, like to look for good bucks. And like I consider a good buck like a good mountain buck, like a 6-year-old 130 to 140. And then like we'll get into those like 150 plus deer.
Oof.
And to be honest, like, dude, that you think about a 150 type deer that lives in the mountains, has never seen agriculture. Like,
yeah. That's awesome.
Dude, that's a hell of a deer. And like they do exist. Like, but you have to be in an area where there's like decent genetics, but they just get age, right? Like anywhere, like think about, anything. It's like, that's why targeting those places where there's fewer people, fewer deer, you kind of have that like higher likelihood of finding that next level buck. And like I'd say every year I find one buck within that like big range, like the 140 plus range. Oftentimes I screw it up. Like, or someone I'm with has screwed it up. I take a lot of people and like, I've seen some giant deer get missed or something stupid happen. But yeah, it's like one of those things where, I try to target those deer because that's fun for me. And then, and sometimes too, it's like, well, dude, this year I haven't, like, it's been struggling. I find like a 120 type buck and it's like, that's a heck of a deer for this particular unit for this day, like for whatever's going on where I'm at. Like I'm way deep, like didn't even know there was deer back here, found this cool spot and like I turned up a good deer. So I think like, but targeting those bigger deer, I have to go to those places where I'm like, that potential's there, I guess. That makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I love two things about this. I like the idea of finding that old deer that just isn't around people. That's so unique, at least in the whitetail world, right? I mean, most of the whitetails that we hunt are deer that are around people all the time. Yeah. So the idea of going somewhere where you're chasing a deer that maybe has never seen a person or very rarely like that, there's something special about that. But then also just the allure of being able to, if you wanted to backpack in for a whitetail, that's just so different. That just seems like a really cool twist on the traditional thing. When you're doing that, I know you said you've done both, but when you do the packing in to whitetail hunt, can you walk me through a little bit of how the logistics might be different? Like one thing right out the gate I'd be curious about would be, where should you set up your camp in relation to where you're going to hunt? Like that was always a thing we were thinking about when we were elk hunting, but I don't know how much that would be different when you're whitetail hunting. How do you think about that And then any other logistics when it comes to, packing in and operating out of the backcountry.
Yeah. So, I mean, the 2 times a year you would do it, like September timeframe, much more pleasant. Like it's nice.
Yeah.
And places that, do that, it's actually more prone to do it early season because you're hunting the deer before they drop. Like, I guess think about like mountain bucks. The reason I call them mountain bucks is because they like live and die on the mountain, and they do these like seasonal things of like they're up at that top third of the mountain. Like I've found whitetails up at 10,000 feet
Wow.
in the summertime, or like 8,500 feet.
That's crazy.
Just in like a little summer range, and then I've also found them down in the bottoms at 3,000 feet. But most of the time I'm like targeting that like higher, maybe not like like might not be above timberline, but like that higher top third of the mountain. And it's conducive to like camping and everything. And then there's like late season, which is that November timeframe, and mountains in November, it can get super cold, and like unpredictable weather. And it's not like we don't backpack hunt elk that same time. So like, late season, you just have so much more gear. I bring like a 4-season tent, sub-0 degree sleeping bag, liner, probably a lot of hand warmers, like dude, just freaking 10 pounds of hand warmers, foot warmers, all of it. Stove, generally like just melting snow for the water that time of year. And then, like for camping, I don't really get too bogged down in it. Like it depends on what's on the ground. Like if there's snow on the ground, I'm probably like finding tracks, finding pockets, and then I've got other pockets that I want to like check. But I'm generally like getting into an area that's hard to get into, and then hunting that area. Like I said, if I'm day hunting, I'm covering probably more ground than if I'm backcountry hunting. But it depends. Like I might set up a base camp. Like let's say there's an opening, whether it's burn or whatever, that I'm hunting. Like I've hiked in 4 or 5 miles, and I've like got a camp. I just set it like downwind, off kind of away from where I think that I'm going to be hunting, and I'll be probably fairly close to like pop up on a glassing ridge and then glass that. And in those scenarios, often I'm actually like sitting and watching those areas a lot longer than I might be if I'm moving all over. Because like once you're invested into a zone, you kind of have to be a little more careful about how you hunt it. If you're going different places, like where you can access from day hunting, you aren't as careful because you can go somewhere else. But when you've like pot committed to a certain canyon, you kind of go in with that. Like, I don't get too bogged down in like where I'm camping, to be 100% honest. Like I camp fairly close to where I'm at, but where it's like obviously not going to spook the deer that I'm hunting, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
We used to like, my buddy used to like pack in a ground blind and like just like long ways and like sit in it, in a heater, like just sit in. I think it was like his tent and his blind, and he would just sit and watch. And he like, dude, the guy had killed some giant bucks over the years. Wow. But for the most part, you're just like, kind of camping near where you're going to go. And then the way that I like to do it, if I had my druthers, like often I'll like, if I'm not seeing what I want, then it's like everything's on my back. I'm hopefully cutting tracks, going to a new spot. Maybe I'll hunt with all that stuff on my back until I get to a spot where this is where I'm going to hunt, or I kill a deer and then camp there, or find a deer and then relocate and then like reset up camp. But it depends on the weather. The weather plays a huge factor in like the logistical aspects of it.
Yeah. Okay. For the sake of, let's assume someone's hearing this and they have not done an elk hunt before. They've not mule deer hunted. They've never done a backcountry hunt. Give me the quick rundown on what somebody should be thinking about if they're going to try to pick a pack for this. Just quick, like a backcountry whitetail hunt, going to backpack in, given what you just described, time of year, kind of factors. What should they be looking for when choosing that super important piece of kit?
Yeah, I mean, you want a large pack. I go with I use the Stone Glacier, and I like internal frame. I would say like a minimum of like a 6,500 cubic inches. I mean, I've got some pictures because it's like there's a place where I killed a buck. It's like a pretty good buck a few years back. And you got to realize like you've got all your crap, plus you've got a buck.
Deer.
And to be 100% honest, like probably where you're killing these bucks, there's a ton of deadfall. And like it's not somewhere you like when you're there, you're like, I got here, but you don't want to make 2 trips. And so like an entire boned out deer plus all your gear gets like a lot of stuff. And you just want to get it out. So I go with like where I can have my gear, and like late season gear takes up so much room. So I do that. And then some kind of like, even think about like an external like lid or something where you can stuff extra gear and like expand that pack. Is key. Like I'll bring like a load shelf kind of thing where I can like pull the bag away from the load shelf, put my gear in that or the meat in that, and like really just expand it. So you've got a lot of room. I wouldn't go on like a late season backcountry hunt with like a light pack. And even when I'm day hunting, I generally want to be able to like carry the whole deer. Plus like you've got extra gear, you've got extra clothes, you're carrying something to rattle with. You got like spotting scope, tripod still. Sometimes I'll just use, actually one of the things that I have kind of switched to is I'll do like, I don't know if you use Vortex stuff, but they've got like that, I call it the baby razor, like the small spotter.
Yep.
Yeah. And then I'll do like big binos. Depending on the country, because I might need to like verify something. But I try to keep like the pack light. So I might just even have like binos on my chest and then like a pair of 18s or like 18 power binoculars in my backpack. So I can cover those open areas and still get like a good gauge on the bucks and the deer around. And like kind of keep it a little bit lighter and faster.
You said a little bit ago that you're usually using a 4-season tent, but do you ever do like the hot tent style, like TP and a little ultralight, titanium stove or anything like that for these late season hunts?
Probably should, but I don't. I don't know. It's just like another thing. I don't know why. A lot of people have asked that, and I've like been on hunts with them. I'm like, yeah, these are great. I'm not opposed to it. I've used them before, but honestly, like I just like keeping it simple. I don't know. Like it's just nice to have like, the other thing too is like, I've been in some like real harsh, like you get a lot of harsh winds or snow and stuff. And I don't know, the hot tent thing just seems like a kind of an extra pain in the butt sometimes. I don't know. Maybe it's just, maybe one day I'll switch to it. And I don't know. I'm like back and forth on that kind of stuff, but I just you just go with what you've always done. I think in some ways, Like,
so so that said though, what's one thing that what's a weird thing that is worth taking? Like if you like to stick with what you usually do and you don't want to bring extra stuff, there's got to be one thing that most people don't think of that you always have to have with you on a hunt like this that either makes life a little easier, a little bit more comfortable, or just comes in handy.
Oh yeah.
What would that be?
Dude, I always have a glassing pad, like something to sit on.
Yeah.
It is huge because like I said, I'm not great at sitting forever, and you get pretty cold too. Cause like you're moving, you're sweating, you're going up these mountains. That's the other factor of like, it's hard to sit. So I bring like something to sit on, cause there's often snow. Like there's very few times that I've killed whitetails where there's not snow on the ground. So there's often snow. And then, like that sitting and waiting and rattling and calling, like it's nice to sit on something. I also like puffer pants, and, like a real warm layer is key. And then, like I said, the hand warmers, like I'll throw in toe warmers. My feet don't get hot. So some people's feet are always hot, but I'll throw those in late season. And then I always have like body warmer, hand warmer things. And I use those in my sleeping bag too, like religiously. So I'll bring like enough where it's like I got 2 per day or something. I don't mind carrying the extra weight of those.
So you mentioned puffer pants. What's the we both wear First Light. Can you walk me through like the basic kit that works best for you for this kind of hunt? Because it would seem kind of tricky because you've got very high exertion for parts of these hunts, and then a lot of sit and wait. What's ending up on you for these trips?
Yeah, so most of the time I'm wearing like more of a late season pant. It's just like a lined 308 pant. I've been using a lot lately. So I'll use that, and like I actually probably won't have thermals underneath, because I like to be able to just dump the heat. Depends on how cold it is. Like if it's sub-zero, I'll probably have thermals and those on, and I'll walk and be fine. But I'll often have like the lined pant thermals, so I can dump the heat. I'll have like the puffer pants for when I stop, and I generally keep those super accessible, but like in a waterproof bag or something like that.
Okay.
Depends. And then I always have my rain gear as well, as like an added element of protection and warmth. And then on my top, I'm probably wearing like a wick, or not a wick, like a kiln hoodie. And then, it depends. Like I've been using that Unk Foundry jacket a lot too. But like when I'm hiking, even if it's cold, I probably don't even have a jacket on. I'm just like, it depends like how cold it is. Sometimes I've got that and I've just got everything opened up. The key is don't sweat. Like, I mean, you will sweat, but like you want it to evaporate. Like you don't get your stuff wet. And then I'll have, I don't know, depends, like either this, I'm wearing it right now, like a Brooks down or like a chamber, like a bigger down, or like what's the new one? The White Cloud.
White Cloud, I think.
Yeah. I'd probably use that one more because it's a little bit lighter and a little more warmth to weight ratio. But yeah, and so it's like, I'm sitting down, I'm glassing, I'm in camp, I'm sleeping in it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Another little fun thing that I do take on those late season backcountry instances, those like slippers, those like down. Yeah. Those are nice.
I've heard a lot of people say they like that.
Yeah. I'll put toe warmers in and then put those in my sleeping bag. Like I've done the last couple of years, I've probably camped 30 days in temperatures like 0 to -20. Dude, it's freaking cold. Like you zip you're like this much of your face is out, like everything's frozen around you, and you got to remember to vent your tent because otherwise you just get like ice and condensation in there. Like,
is it worth it?
But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, like that's why it's nice. Like if you can, you like pull a trailer or have like a base camp, or even just like sleeping in your truck where you can have like more warm stuff. But honestly, like it's not that bad. Like you kind of warm up in your tent and you find little tricks. Like I'll like boil water, put it in my water bottle, throw it in my tent or my sleeping bag. The hand warmer trick is pretty solid. I don't know, like different stuff. Like some hunts, like when I know it's real cold, I'll use my stove, but I'll actually bring like a little carbon monoxide thing too, because I know people that have had problems with that. So I'll have a little thing. I won't run it, but I'll like, just to get the chill off a little bit. Crack it in there and make sure it's vented, and then turn it off and set the canister outside.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds, with the conditions that can be out there, it can sound obviously brutal, but at the same time, there's also a certain appeal to the whole thing. A little bit of that sufferfest. Type 2 fun can sometimes be special in its own way. So this whole thing is super intriguing to me. Just taking something that I know I love, but has sometimes you can fall into a rut. I think with whitetail hunting, sometimes it can become, at least traditionally, how whitetail hunting is, and what I do a lot of the time is kind of the same old after a while. And I love it, but the idea of taking this loved thing in a very familiar setting and tossing it into a very unfamiliar set of circumstances is so appealing. To be able to have that adventure while also chasing the critter that fascinates you more than anything else. I mean, that's super, super interesting idea. So this is high on my to-do list. Maybe even this year. So
sweet. Yeah. Well, I think you'll love it. Like, and I think guys that like hunt a lot of whitetails, you just feel like it's probably the same, right? Like you could draw so many similarities, just like a very large scale. And then I also think like in a way you can get away with a little bit more in some aspects. Like with this, like you just have to know, like if you got a smaller area that you cover, right? Like exponentially increase that. No, like you're going to have to cover a lot of ground to kind of like make up for that density kind of thing. But, man, you can get into areas and like see a lot of deer and have like some phenomenal hunts. And you can honestly find some deer that are like great bucks, like, for wherever, there's like really good opportunity too.
Yeah. Sounds like it. Well, I know you've got a hard stop here, so I want to be respectful of your time, but real quick, Remi, can you give folks listening a rundown of where they can see some of your films and shows, connect with you, get your content? Like, what should they be checking out?
Yeah, for sure, man. They, at Remi Warren at pretty much any social media, RemiWarren. And then I've got my YouTube channel where, release, quite a few videos now on that, Remi Warren YouTube channel. And then I've got my podcast, Live Wild podcast, pretty much everywhere podcasts are available. So
awesome. Man, you're doing great stuff. You've been doing great stuff for a long time, and a lot of us have benefited from it. So thank you for all that. And thanks for this. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on. It's always fun to talk about something different. Yeah.
Hopefully picking your brain about maybe elk or mule deer next as I continue to expand the boundaries and borders of what we do here.
Perfect. Yeah, well, keep me posted. Yeah, if you need any pointers in the right direction for the old backcountry whitetails.
I definitely will take you up on that. Appreciate it.
I'll be interested to hear. You got to connect with me afterwards, and I want to hear kind of your recap of what you thought. And don't be afraid to use some like crazy tactics because, do a lot of calling. If you think you're over calling, just keep calling. You'll be fine. Like you aren't going to scare them away.
I love like the sense of freedom that gives me to just like be crazy on the horns and make a lot of racket. Like that sounds a lot of fun. So
that's what I like about it. Like make some noise. Like it's not what's going to happen. Like you probably aren't going to spook them out, right? So you're either going to call them in or not and move. Like it's not like you're dedicated to that one spot. So it's fun. I think you'll enjoy it.
All right, I'm in for it.
Cool.
All right, and that's a wrap. Hope you guys enjoyed that one as much as I did. I appreciate you being here with me. I hope that these last couple podcasts have given you something new to think about, something new to put a pep in your step this year and try something different. Whitetail hunting is so rich and so diverse if we're willing to step outside of the usual. There's nothing wrong with the usual. I love going and hunting on the back 40 just as much as the next guy. But sometimes you need to change a pace. Sometimes you need to push yourself outside of your comfort zone. That's what this series is all about. That's what our podcast today was all about. And I hope it's something you will give some thought. So until next time, thank you all for being here and stay wired to hunt.